Ahoy, everyone! It's a great day to be talking about British Columbia provincial politics because now that we are in the last week of the BC provincial election, things are starting to shift significantly in the BC Conservatives' direction. Yesterday, I said the BC Conservatives got a good poll bump because of the leaders' debate, which was absolutely true. And a day after that, we now have the Conservatives not just 3 points above the NDP, but 6 points. And even yesterday, Main Street Research, in their model of the election, was projecting that Premier David Eby, the NDP Premier of British Columbia, is going to lose his own seat in Vancouver Point Grey. That was when the polls were only showing the Conservatives up 3. Now that they're up 6, he's definitely likely to lose his own riding. And when I say this, I don't say that there is some likelihood, like a 10% shot he might lose, or a 15% shot, or 30% shot he doesn't win his own riding. I am talking about a majority chance that David Eby does not lose his own riding. And if you know the background of the riding of Vancouver Point Grey, it used to be Gordon Campbell's riding, it was then Christy Clark's riding, who lost the riding to David Eby, not because David Eby is brilliant. He basically performed like any other NDP candidate does in that riding. It was just that Christy Clark was so unpopular, people didn't come out and vote for her. So David Eby, getting the typical amount of votes an NDP got, then ended up taking her seat. And for some reason, the NDP thought this means he's a brilliant political strategist and decided to make him the new premier after John Horgan stepped down without a leadership race, mind you, because they bullied all of his opponents out. If you think he can't handle an internal leadership race because even the NDP base outside of downtown Vancouver thinks he's a radical, maybe don't run him in a general election as your premier candidate. But that's a side issue for another day to talk about in terms of strategy. But this is the current Main Street election model for the Lower Mainland, and it is showing in Vancouver Point Grey, the BC Conservative candidate Paul Ranchford is leading 46.5 to Eby at 38.8, and then the Greens picking up 14.7% of the vote. Obviously, this is only a projection. It might not come true whatsoever. Maybe Eby is secretly super popular around there and he gets 70% of the vote. I highly doubt it. One day I was driving home from helping Brian Burgay in his riding. I know his riding, Vancouver Langar, is actually a little bit more south, and I was driving to Abbotsford, but I had to drive somebody home, and they were living in Point Grey. But when I was driving through Point Grey, it was all Paul Ranchford signs. And then actually, it was Brian Burgay who told me that somebody had made an excuse to him who was with the NDP on why David Eby has so few signs in his own riding. And that person said, well, it's because all of Eby supporters live on second and third floor buildings, like the second and third floor buildings, which doesn't make much sense because most of the homes in Point Grey are still single family detached houses. And I drove down several streets and I could not find a David Eby sign. This isn't me like just driving through the riding for about a minute and then saying, I saw 3 Paul Ranchford signs and 0 Eby signs. That means Paul's winning. No, I mean, like, I was driving around for a while trying to find David Eby signs. I was just wondering what they looked like, if they put his face on them. Couldn't find a single one. And it's because the people in this riding are actually very mismatched with David Eby as a representative. David Eby is a radical progressive activist, and the people of Point Grey are actually disproportionately more wealthy business owners. They hate his anti business policies. These are the type of people who absolutely agree with Chip Wilson, who does live in the riding as well, that David Eby is a communist. And while some people might then come out and say, well, he's not a communist, you don't know what communism is. Guys, I know what communism is. It's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek jab at Eby because there's also no evidence that he likes capitalism in any way, free markets, or property rights. The man is not a friend of business. And when I say business, I'm not talking about big business. I'm talking about anyone who wants to do any business of any kind that doesn't want to include the government. Anyways, I want to move on here a little bit more. We'll talk about this map. I don't want to show too much because I do pay for the Main Street subscription and it would be a bit rude to them if I just spilled out all their data. But things are looking very good for the Conservatives in this Vancouver metro area. It looks like the Conservatives are just going to sweep Richmond. Langara is a lock. Vancouver, Quilchina is a lock. A lot of these ridings in Vancouver are actually very solid Conservative areas. And then I think we actually not only will be picking up Coquitlam Burke Mountain, but I think we'll even grab probably these toss-ups like Port Moody, Burquitlam, where I'm helping door knock these days. I don't think in these toss-up or soft NDP ridings that the NDP is actually going to be able to pull off the numbers that the projections are showing them. Because these projections are based on ideal turnout, that if your people actually turn out for you, this is the number that they assume you'll get. I don't think the NDP is energized, or at least their base is energized. They don't have a reason to show up and vote. Maybe a bunch of them are just anti-conservative voters, and so they will vote for the NDP because, John Rusted's mean or whatever. But that's not exactly a winning narrative. That's, in fact, a losing narrative. That is you saying, I'm voting just because I don't like the other guy. And that's not exactly something that's going to get people running around the block, knocking on doors and running to the polling stations to vote themselves. That's a loser narrative that we suck at our jobs, sure, but the other guys could be worse, or don't let them in because they're evil fascist conservatives. Nobody actually believes that, and nobody is risk as averse to what John Rustad and the conservatives are offering. Lower taxes, tougher on crime policies, getting rid of insane drug policies, focusing the school system back on academics and away from social issue garbage. Everyone likes that. And maybe for a second here, before I get into the projections, although I'll just give you a hint of them right here, this is what they look like with undecideds added in. We not only are seeing the undecideds shrink over time, but both the conservatives are taking votes away from the NDP, as well as the Greens are taking away votes from the NDP. People are going to start pretending that they've never voted NDP in their entire lives, even though most of the province has probably voted NDP at some point. Everyone wants to deny that they've ever known David Eby or ever thought he might have been a good premier at one point. But there is a myth, and this is something that actually a lot of red Tories tend to perpetuate in conservative circles. And I think that it's been their theories of politics were decisively proven wrong with the failed leadership of the Conservative Party in Aaron O'Toole. Moderate voters are not moderate by temperament. Just because they're moderate doesn't mean they want mild policy. They don't just want a slight cleanup of the tax code. They don't want just slightly more efficient ways of spending the money that the government's already collecting. Right now, moderates in BC want tough on crime policies. They want significant tax reductions. They want a lot more resource projects approved. They want way more houses built. They want to slash bureaucracy. Moderates are only moderate because they don't have the same views as an orthodox conservative or an orthodox NDP person. They can have some collective views on, like eclectic views on certain issues. But right now, the moderates in BC are definitely conservative-minded voters right now. They may not be pro-life people. They may not be hawkish on foreign policy. They may not be, Christian conservative types, but they are very much not NDP or progressive. They are conservative by temperament of the issues that are driving their votes this year. Other years, in 2015, for example, the populist type voters were actually more to the center left for Justin Trudeau, that Stephen Harper had gotten old and stuffy in office, and we want the sunshine back. And for some reason, that's Justin Trudeau. We want sunny ways. So the attitude of the moderate voter in 2015 was more social programs, was being okay with deficit spending to gird up the healthcare system and all this stuff, which Justin Trudeau completely threw down the drain through mass immigration and all the other crazy policies he implemented that undermined his increased social spending. So not only do we have massive deficits and debt, we also don't have enough resources to go around because he imported 1 million people in certain years. And so per capita, our actual quality of life is going down. So, but to get back to BC, this is where I think that the NDP is going to undershoot their projected vote numbers because their people don't have a reason to show up and vote. They're just voting maybe because they don't like the conservatives, but that's not a reason really to vote. The conservative voters are showing up because they hate David Eby, they hate the NDP, and they really like John Rustad and John Rustad's policies. They have a lot of reasons to vote for. The NDP have one. I don't like the conservatives because the NDP definitely haven't been doing a good enough job for having people running out the door saying we need another 4 years of this. Nobody actually thinks we do. But now let's just kind of scroll through the data here from Main Street. So we have 36 for the NDP, 42 for the Conservatives. And it gets even worse when you start to look at decided voters. I'm just going to skip through this stuff. It's just age demographic type data. I think this is the one interesting bit we can talk about. The Conservatives are currently winning 46.7% of male voters, but the NDP is only winning 38.7% of female voters, and they only have a zero point 0.2 lead over the Conservatives. And I was predicting this to people in the background. I'm not trying to be too rude to David Eby. When women see David Eby on stage, they immediately think weak. And women hate weak looking leaders, weak sounding people. They actually like tough on crime type politicians. Even I'm talking about more center left women. A lot of more center left women are voting for security. And oftentimes that's bound up in having more social benefits, for having a better social safety net. But because the NDP have betrayed women so much on actual personal security around crime and drugs, a lot of people are moving towards Rusted. And David Eby's obnoxious performance in the leaders' debate and weakness without good posture, pointing at people, staring at them, that turned off a lot of women from voting for the guy, I believe. Anyways, but I now want to show you the horrifying numbers of how people voted in 2020 and how they're saying that they're going to vote in the 2024 provincial election. Right now, only 67% of people who voted for Horgan's NDP in 2020 are planning on voting for Eby's. That's terrible. Eby has been suffering at these low ratings for the entire election. He has not gained any more confidence in his NDP base, and the Conservatives are actually cleaning up 20% of the 2020 NDP vote. And the Conservatives, even though they don't really have that much to do with the BC Liberal Party, they're grabbing up 70% of their 2020 vote, with the NDP only grabbing up 16. And then they are even taking 20% of First to Know's Green vote from 2020, and Eby's only grabbing up 18%. Another party, which included the BC Conservatives in 2020, since they were just a fringe party back then, they are grabbing up 70.9% of another party, and that's a significant sample size, 84 people. Don't remember, didn't vote, 52%, 52.9, so 53% of people who didn't vote or don't remember who they voted for. Again, I've said this before, I doubt anyone didn't remember. I think most people in this category just didn't vote. 53% of people in that category voting Conservative. Only 17.6 are voting NDP. And there's still 18% more undecided. And unless Eby can win 100% of the undecideds in these categories, he's toast. He has nowhere to get more votes from. I want to see if I can pull up the chart of decided voters, because it's absolutely pathetic. Yeah, I think this is one. It still has some undecideds in it, but these are like true undecideds without leaners added in, people who are likely to vote. 43 Conservative, 38 NDP, 4% undecided, 11% Green. The Conservatives are leading by more than there are legitimate undecided voters left. And I don't think that the Conservatives are going to not take any more of these undecided voters. I think that the undecided voters are going to keep splitting 2-1 like we've been seeing towards the Conservatives. And if that happens, forget about David Eby just losing his riding. I think you're going to have a lot of these ridings where the NDP didn't invest that much time and effort because they assume it's a safe seat. We don't have to try too hard, and they could lose these areas. I think there are some places rated on the Main Street model as safe, which are not safe at all. They just happen to be ridings that the BC NDP won hard in 2020, which is a very different election from this election. There are places like Haida Gwaii. I've heard that from the candidate on the ground, Chris Sankey, and his manager, Ryan Painter. They're having great responses on the island of Haida Gwaii, on the mainland areas, those small rural towns. Tons of people like them. It's a heavy First Nations riding, and those people hate David Eby because he sucks at his job. It doesn't matter all of the sort of virtue signaling he does around Indigenous issues and how much he tries to smear the Conservatives for being anti-Indigenous based on literally nothing. They don't like him. There are tons of ridings on Vancouver Island I don't think are possible to go NDP, even if they project them NDP, because the drug issues are too bad for NDP partisans to ignore. So even if they like the NDP more than the Conservatives, they might cast a ballot for the Conservatives, cast a ballot for the Greens to at least say, well, I didn't vote for the NDP, or they'll just stay home. I think this is going to be a big stay-home election right now for the NDP. Anyways, I think that's a good a little snapshot of what's currently going on in the province. The Conservatives still have a few more policies to release before the end of the election. They have big announcements pretty much every day up until I think the last 2 days. And the NDP continues to just talk about how much they don't like the Conservatives. You got to earn the ability to be negative. The NDP have not earned the ability to cast aspersions at other people when their governance has been so horrible. But anyways, that's it for me today, guys. If you want to support this show, go down to the description below and donate to the Give Send Go legal fund we're running. I also have the link for that pinned at the top of the comments. If you have any suggestions for other videos, leave that down in the comments. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and recommend it to a friend if you can. Anyways, have a good day, everyone. See you later.